Hey guys, welcome to the Sunday night edition of I'm Still Playing, and this evening we're going to talk about World of Warcraft's lore problem. And so what do I mean when I say the lore problem? Well, what I'm talking about is why is it so damn hard to even understand what the lore is, like what the story is so far? How did we get here? What's going on? Who are the characters? Who is Xalatath? And if you don't believe that it's a problem, I invite you to just do a quick search on the War Within story and War Within lore, and you will find content creators on YouTube falling over themselves to create for you the story so far videos and recap videos, and here's everything you need to know about the War Within. And the reason that they're doing this is because it's genuinely difficult to get a grasp on what's happened so far, even if you've been playing fairly currently. And if you're coming back from having not played for a long time, and now is a great time to come back, it's even worse. It's really terrible. I'm not going to try to catch you up on the lore itself in this video. For that, I mean, if you are interested in like sort of knowing what the story is, I absolutely recommend that you check out some of the videos that I just showed in that little scrolling clip, because people like Bellular and Kalani are going to do a far better job of explaining to you all of the stuff that's going on in the War Within than I will. But what I do want to talk about is sort of how did we get to this position? Why is it so difficult to understand what's going on with the story in the World of Warcraft? And for that, I'm going to take us back a little bit. So I want to go back to the olden days of MMOs originally and how stories were told in MMOs. And traditionally in MMOs, when you started a new character, you started within a specific spot in time, and as your character progressed, so did time. And that was how time passed in the MMOs. The world itself didn't change, but as you progressed through the story, then the events that happened around you sort of moved the story forward. So for instance, when you started off in the starting zone for the Night Elves, the things that happened later on, like Onyxia disrupting the court, haven't happened yet. But by the time that your character reaches level 60, those things have happened. And this is how stories were told in pretty much all of the MMOs at that time, and it does provide for a very linear, straightforward story progression that's easy to follow. And Blizzard kept this linear story progression through WoW's original in-game, as well as through their first expansion, the Burning Crusade. Even though there were new zones and new races introduced, all of those events happened within the Burning Crusade after the events that happened in the original game. So still very much straightforward story progression. And then they did a really cool thing in the Wrath of the Lich King. They introduced phasing, and what phasing basically does is it allows them to change a particular portion of the world based on the actual character's progression. So you could go into a hut and then come back out and buildings would be on fire and people would be running around. It allows you to see NPCs and events and things that weren't there a few minutes ago based on progression in the story. This really went a long ways towards allowing players to feel like they were in a world that actually was changing around them based on what they were doing. And then along came Cataclysm, and in Cataclysm, Blizzard did something that no one else had really done much of in MMOs at all, which is they changed their fundamental base world irrevocably. They overhauled all of the zones in the Eastern Kingdom and Kalimdor to represent the changes that had taken place because of the Cataclysm. And this was not necessarily a breaking of the story per se, but it was the first time that parts of the story became unreachable by new players, because you could no longer level up in the versions of Teldrassil and the Darkshore that existed before Cataclysm. If you created a new zone, a new character, you were going to be leveling in the version that existed out after Cataclysm. The story was still pretty straightforward and linear in this way, but it was the sort of the first time that players would get a different experience based on when they joined the game. But there was actually a really good reason for this too. In Cataclysm, they introduced flying to the old world, and all of those original zones were never designed to handle flying. So the Cataclysm gave them a lore reason to change up the world, to overhaul those zones. And they also streamlined questing. They revamped a lot of the quest hubs. They introduced a lot of new concepts and quests that had come about in the last several years. So they freshened up the zones overall and made them better from a gameplay standpoint. But the cost was that you could no longer experience those zones as the original players had. And even though Cataclysm did represent the first time that players weren't able to experience the original story as original players could, the story was still very much linear and in a straightforward fashion. And it continued this way through the Mists of Pandaria and into and through Warlords of Draenor. And in fact, for me, Warlords of Draenor really represents Blizzard's peak storytelling time. It was the expansion itself started off with a very linear, fast-paced series of quests that led you up to and through the establishment of your garrison, and in fact, the whole story of Warlords of Draenor was very linear, and you progressed all through all of the zones in a forward fashion, and the story and the characters developed as you made your way through the entire expansion in just an absolute fantastic way that had you really caring about the characters. And in fact, I think 2 minutes of WoW's best storytelling comes from the Warlords of Draenor, and I'm going to go ahead and just present that to you right now. You've probably seen it before, but if you haven't, it's always worth a rewatch.
Could have survived that.
This vessel is set to blow. We should get to safety.
Bring the cannon around. We'll send both of these ships to the bottom of the sea.
Mara, how?
In the light, we are one. Belonged with us to return. Our bond is iron. But you are so easily broken. What do you want, little girl?
Your head.
Cannon is in position. On your command.
Prepare to fire. Such arrogance to believe that you alone could defeat me.
Together.
Wait! They're alive!
I've got them. You will all die!
Just you.
So I know, right? It's just amazing. I still get shivers when Iriel says "just you." It's just some of the best storytelling in World of Warcraft for my money. But actually, Blizzard got a lot of blowback about the very linear nature of Warlords of Pandaria, especially that whole beginning quest line. And so as a result of that, that's when they made some changes that came about in Legion that honestly for me was sort of the beginning of the downfall for Blizzard storytelling and for WoW storytelling. What they did was in Legion, they introduced the scouting map, and you got this shortly after you got your class hall. And the scouting map allowed you essentially to do all of the zones, any of the zones in Legion in any order that you wanted to. So what did this mean exactly? Well, it meant that the story in each of the zones had to be completely self-encapsulated. And so there was no narrative flow going from one zone to the next. And then the other thing that it meant was that the overarching story for the expansion had to be pretty much agnostic of the story told in the zones, because you could do them in any order that you wanted to. Or at the very least, it had to not really pick up and get going until you finished the stories from all of the expansion's zones. And this meant a couple of things. This meant, one, I think the overarching stories in the expansions were weaker. From my own perspective, this has certainly been the case for every expansion after Warlords of Draenor. And it also meant that it was less opportunity to really develop characters. And let's face it, the best story is about characters, right? The plot should serve the characters, if you will. And so while you had some fantastic characters in the previous expansions that you really came to relate to, that was much, much less the case in the expansions that came after Warlords of Draenor. I would say one possible exception is Sylvanas and Anduin from the Shadowlands expansion. You did get a fairly deep dive into those characters and some of the backstory in those characters. But that was it in terms of like really compelling characters out of the expansions. So that's part of the reason that I think that storytelling has really kind of suffered in Blizzard of lately, because now all of the expansions have this choose your own quest kind of progression that I think just makes for weaker storytelling and weaker overarching narratives in each of the expansions. But the scouting table, in my opinion, wasn't even the worst decision that Blizzard had made regarding story in World of Warcraft. No, that decision came about just before the Shadowlands expansion with the introduction of Chromie Time. So what is Chromie Time? Well, now, when you create a new character in World of Warcraft, you're first taken to Exile Island. Or you can actually still choose the starting zone for your race, but you're encouraged to use Exile Island. That's the default choice. And Exile Island is a standalone, story-agnostic zone that introduces you to some of the mechanics of your class. Then you are directed to go to Chromie, and from Chromie, you select one of the expansions to level your character in. And you will go from your current level all the way to whatever the max level is for the expansion that you're currently playing in within just that expansion. So if you choose Warlords of Draenor, you're going to go from level 10 to level 60 or now level 70 in Warlords of Draenor. And when you go from, if you were to choose Legion, then you would go from level 10 to level 60 in Legion. That means that new players are never experiencing the entire story of World of Warcraft in any way. You can go back and choose to play those other zones if you wanted to, but you're not going to get anything from it because you've already reached max level. So you would literally just be doing it for the lore purposes, which is fine, but it'd be nice if we were going to experience your game if you gave us rewards for doing it. So this is the main reason why when new players come to World of Warcraft, they really have no idea what the story is. And in fact, right now in the pre-patch, you could even get to level 70 without doing any of the expansions because you can use the pre-patch events to level your character from whatever current level she is all the way to 70 without doing any story content, just running around and running those events over and over again. So Blizzard has essentially said, fuck you in terms of caring about the story. What they really want you to do is to get to level 70 as quickly as possible so that you can play in the expansion when it comes out. And I get that. I understand that. That's really what they're all about. But what that means is that for us, there is absolutely no good reason to understand why the story is what it is. And as far as Blizzard's concerned, they're perfectly fine with that. And in fact, if you want to understand what the story is, and Blizzard invites you to watch one of their videos that they're putting out that retells the story or encapsulates the story, or go buy a book and you can read about it in your free time. But we're not going to bother to explain it to you, at least not in-game. However, though, I don't want to end completely on a sour note, and I do have some reason to hope for storytelling in World of Warcraft. I think Blizzard is keenly aware that their game story has become incredibly convoluted and hard to follow, and I think that's part of the reason why they're putting out these cinematics and these anime shorts and what have you, and trying to give you at least some idea of the story so far from outside the game, at the very least, and to let you know sort of who's Alatath and Anduin and Sylvanas and what the role these characters will play in the War Within going forward. And we also know that the War Within is the first in a 3-part series of expansions, which suggests that there will be an overarching narrative that runs all the way through all of these expansions, which again leads me to believe that perhaps they are caring about the narrative and that they want you to feel this story as it goes from expansion to expansion to expansion. I don't know. We're just going to have to see, I suppose. But I think that's the video for today. So I hope you've enjoyed this little retrospective in World of Warcraft's storytelling. And if you liked the video, please smash that like button down below. If you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to do so. I absolutely thrive off of the subscriptions. But in any case, thanks for coming by, and I hope you guys have a great week. We'll see you soon.